Thank you, Andrew and Vivian, for inviting me again to another edition of Kingpins24. My name is Edward Hertzman. I am founder and president of Sourcing Journal and Rivet. And before we begin this panel, why don't we just take 90 seconds, and if each of the panelists can briefly introduce themselves and what they do. Emrah, you want to start?
Hello, this is Emrah ÖZKORKMAZ. I am working in Bregla Denim. I work as Director of Sales and Marketing. And I've been in the denim business for the last 20 years. Briefly from my side, like this.
Andrea?
Hi, everybody. Thanks also for invitation. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Vivian. I'm Andrea Venier. I'm the Managing Director of Officina Plus 39. We are a chemical company based in Italy. And we are working hard to develop innovation, working to develop technologies able to reduce the impact of chemical industry in our fashion industry and the denim industry.
And Taimur?
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here with my co-panelists. My name is Taimur Malik. I am the consultant for regenerative business development at Stylers International, which is a first of its kind non-profit denim garment manufacturer in Pakistan, where all of the profits are plowed into healthcare, education, and a series of other philanthropic endeavors. I have a background in regenerative agriculture as the founder of Drawdown Farm, which is the largest regenerative farm in Pakistan, and actually started regenerative agriculture in the country a few years ago. And my passion lies in creating a truly bio-based, regenerative, and circular economy that powers the entire global economic framework.
So let's set the stage for today's conversation. Let's start with a real macro level question, right? So we all know the fashion industry is considered one of the biggest culprits of water pollution. And as a group, are we making meaningful strides towards actual change and improvement? Emrah, let's start with you. What is your take on this? Walk us through.
Okay, I can say that I want to start with the words of Secretary General of United Nations, Antonio Guterres. Last month, he pointed out, he tried to alarm the world. He said, I am here to sound the alarm. The world must wake up. But I can say the denim business already woke up, because as this panel itself is showing that fact, we are all aware about the, how we need to not to pollute the world. We need to be careful about the environment, especially the water, because we have very limited water and we need to care about our sources for the water. As Bregla Denim, what we are doing, we are a denim mill and we do care about the water reservation so much. We have the Care for Water certificate and we are the pioneer in the sector. And we do have the GOT certificate and the GRS certificates, and those certificates are already addressing the point to use less water. And what we are doing in denim business, we are using less number of pads, or we are using less water. We are trying to discharge the water as less as possible. Like, doing the spaghetti, you can use very less amount of water. You can just absorb the water. Instead, you use many water, then you filter it. So we are trying to focus on how less as possible we are trying to use the water.
Andrea or Taimur, you wanna add anything to that question?
Yeah, of course, I agree with Emrah. And also, the UN agenda, water conservation is becoming one of the goals. The SDG number 6 is remembering us how is important the water in the UN 2030 agenda. So here I think we should start from one fact. The water crisis remains one of the top risks for the humanity. So this is for me the starting point. 90% of the world's natural disasters are related to water. And we know also very well that 2 billion people are living in countries exposed to high water stress. So all of us, we know that water is really essential for our life. And I think also fashion industry knows that. And our industry, fashion industry, in the recent year has become more aware of the importance of the water. Many initiatives and innovation, new technologies came in the market to reduce the negative impacts around the water. And we can say, I'm certainly, that important steps forward have been made in our industry. But let me say also, let me a little bit critics that still I think the fashion industry is still currently deeply rooted in a linear approach. So what the fashion industry is still doing mainly is make, use, and dispose. So according to me, what we need is to really work hardly, the entire, as we are calling it now, group, so the entire industry, we should really hardly work to redesign better sustainable models. So really this, I think that we're starting to think how we can make a more circular model. So circularity should not be only in the material, but also in the water approach. So we need to protect much more possible the purity of water coming from the resources like mountain. We need to work more, according to me, to develop a circular concept around the water, trying to reduce, of course, much more possible the consumption, but trying to understand how we can reuse it. And to do that, what is important is to involve the young generation, talking about designers or technicians, because really we need this new approach becoming our new standard.
So you made an interesting point about technology. There is a lot of new technology out there that can reduce water waste. But Emrah, you know, back to you, is the industry really taking advantage of this technology that's available to them?
Yeah, I can say that there are so many improvements in the technology if we consider 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Now, there are many technologies using less water, either in the, production of the cotton or in the fabric production stage, or even in the, ready-made garment processes or in the laundry processes. We are working on many new technologies like, ozone is something, new technology, and we are not using that much water in ozone especially. So on the other hand, what we can say, we are now using a very less amount of water for the drying process, or maybe on the, what we can say, for the washing process. There are many new technologies. The number of baths we are decreasing, for example, less discharging, and those kind of water care issues are very crucial for our lives. Why it is very crucial? Because now all of us are talking about sustainability, but we are trying to do organic and we are trying to do recycled. But organic has a limited capacity, which is around 2% all over the world. You cannot do anything or everything organic. Or let's say recycle. You can do 3% of your garments as recycled by the technology we are using at the moment. Totally, it makes around 5%. That's why we need to focus on how we can use less water. That's why we are working on new technologies, and we are using 70% less of water for our production stages. That means we are using 1/3 of conventional methods, and that means you are discharging many less water, so that you don't need to care about to recycle or reuse that water. We are already using very less amount of water during our fabric production, and this is something which is very crucial as a technology in fabric production.
I want to stay on this topic of technology for one more question. Then I want to pivot for a second. Andrea, one of the issues that you often hear is that the CapEx requirement to implement this technology can be quite daunting, and not every manufacturer has that type of liquidity to make these necessary investments. Is there any way, I don't know, that brands or retailers could potentially get involved to offset this? Because this is a big part of their, 2025 or 2030 initiatives. Could governments offer incentives or subsidies to help offset this? How do we get more factories, more mills to embrace this technology that's available?
So, as also Emrah said, there are a lot of new technologies that permit us nowadays to reduce the water consumption. In most of the case, these represent, as you said, some new investment for the industry. In other case, also can work, I don't know, in our company, for example, in Officina Plus 39, we developed one concept called the Aqualess mission that is working conventional machine that is permitting us to reduce 75% of the water consumption. This born this concept during the lockdown, just to support our customer that hold for a certain period, as we know the crisis due to the lockdown had to hold some new investment. And we worked to develop some new technologies. But in general, I think again is important to change the starting point. So means that we have to change the approach. Because it's true, the industry need maybe in some cases a big investment in new technology to reduce the impact. But again, here we have to think more about of the water scarcity or abundance. In other cases, they are creating flooding problems in some countries. We have to think about the water stress. So it means how much the ability to provide the fresh water to the human use, that is the most important. And this is becoming the water risk. So the possibility for a country, for a community, for a company, as we are talking about company, to experiencing a water-related challenge. So as I say, water scarcity or other problem related to water, pollution of the water. So if we start to assess this risk, I think the entire approach will change. So here I'm replying to your question. So that's the reason that I think we should start to develop a water management strategies system in any companies. Today we have, for example, the ISO 4000, that is the standards related to the environment management. So it's covering all the environment aspect, the standard. But I think this is where the brands, where also the governments and the related organization should work and can push in a good way the industry to work really and dedicating a real water management system. I think this is something that we should focus and where the brands, the government can really make their parts. And when you are doing this type of investment, means you are creating a proper water system management, I'm sure that any company will realize how much money can save investing in certain technology, of course, having such long vision. Not today, we have to think what is happening, which are the benefits in the next 5 to 10 years for one company. So firstly, to change the approach, and then I'm sure that if we can change the approach and creating a standard about the water can be one of the options. This is just a proposal by me, but this because in this moment nobody really is counting how much it's costing to treat the water, polluted water, and how to face also the water scarcity issue, and it's becoming just a cost. But I think if we can have a proper management system, you can really have a different approach and you can see how much you can save in terms of cost during a certain period, and really this becoming at the end a challenge, but also big opportunities for any company when they can say they can save money in their pockets.
So let's pivot the conversation a little bit. Taimur.
If I might add,
Sure,
yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I think just based on what the other panelists just said, I'd like to add a couple of other things which I think don't enter the dynamic of the conversation when we're talking about water conservation technologies. And I firstly have to say I absolutely agree with Andrea that there is a deficit of what is called true cost accounting. Water is considered as this free resource that we can take, make, dispose, pollute. And I think that that's a big problem. So I think that needs to be rectified, and governments have to have a role, and everyone has to come together with industry to create a pricing for it, so that we can then create a cost system that reduces its usage, just like we're starting to do with carbon markets and CO2 and greenhouse gases, right? The next thing that I'd like to add is technology on the agricultural sphere. So, Emrah spoke a little bit about how organic cotton is just not enough, and there's a scarcity of it. There's a demand supply cleavage. We have a lot more demand of organic in the world than we have supply of organic cotton. There's a study done, I think in circa 2017, which showed that organic cotton uses a whopping 91% less water, right? And so we're at a point where there's what's now become a buzzword, which is regenerative agriculture. And regenerative agriculture is a slew of techniques that can drastically reduce the amount of water that is used in agriculture. It has a host of other benefits, but essentially as you build soil, you're sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and you're creating something that's very spongy, and that has the capacity to hold water. And there are studies that showcase that for every 1% of organic matter you add in soils, the soil have the ability per acre to store about 27,000 to 30,000 more gallons of water. So that is something that I think the industry and governments need to come together to help farmers, because in this linear and extractive economic model, we've essentially left the farmers to their own devices. And especially in the global south, you have small farmers who do not have the ability to learn new techniques or implement new technologies, and for which I think the onus lies on both governments and industry to come together and help the farmers to drastically alter the paradigm of agriculture. And if we can do this on a large scale by doing a slew of techniques like adding the right kinds of composts, biological inputs, even trees in systems called agroforestry, we can drastically alter the trajectory of the world. And one last sort of concept that I think is very important for our viewers today that most people don't realize. We have a broken carbon cycle in the world. At this point, everyone recognizes this, and which is why we are in the climate crisis that we are in at just 1.1 degrees of warming over pre-industrial times. But we also have a broken water cycle. And in many ways, these two things are inextricably linked. The destruction of what we would call nature in the world, whether it's forests, peatlands, grasslands, what that has done is that it has destroyed the water cycle of the earth. So most people think that rain comes from the oceans, which is partially true. About 60% of the water that we get in the form of rain is from what's called the big water cycle, which comes from the oceans. But about 40% actually is based on land. So the more greenery you have and green cover, so barrenness is terrible. You're not going to get rain in barren environments, or not nearly enough rain. So the Amazon is green because it rains a lot, but it rains a lot in the Amazon because it's very green. So you have transpiration, which creates cloud cover, which brings consistent and continuous rain. So this water cycle needs to be fixed. And regenerative agriculture is a cheap, of course, we need reforestation, we need afforestation, we need urban forestry, we need all of those things, but we also need regenerative agriculture that puts trees on farmlands, that creates green cover all the time. We don't leave barren fields. And what that will do is that it will restore the water cycle, which will then bring water back to planet Earth.
Taimur, I actually have a couple follow-up questions that I'd like to ask you, but unfortunately right now, we have to end our live session. I know there's another group right behind this that's about to go live, but we're going to continue this. And for anyone that wants to continue listening to our conversation, please join us on Kingpins24 on demand online, and you'll be able to hear the entirety of this conversation. So let's take a 1-second pause, and we'll be right back. All right, Taimur. So following up a little bit on what you just said, cotton cultivation sometimes takes a bad rap as being a large drain on water. Is this an accurate portrayal of the situation, or is this just some type of marketing people are using against the industry?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question, Eddie. And I think it's context dependent. But in large parts of the global south, the agricultural system is fairly degraded and degenerative. And it ends up using a lot of water because there's no pricing on water. Farmers are not taught the sort of techniques that can really help them reduce the amount of water, right? And so when you do things like flood irrigation, you're using a lot of water. And when you're doing things like consistent tilling, which most farmers end up doing, using a lot of chemicals and chemical fertilizers, all of that degrades soils over time, which reduces their water holding capacity. And when you're doing flood irrigation, you're just using a heck of a lot of water. So there is certainly a great degree of truth in that. Environmental groups have highlighted some pretty glaring examples, like the Oral Sea in Central Asia, which essentially got destroyed because of cotton cultivation, right? So those examples are there. But without sounding really apocalyptical, we have to consider the alternatives which now exist. We now have the knowledge systems to help the farmers to completely change the way that they do agriculture. And in doing so, they can actually sequester carbon, and they can drastically reduce the amount of chemicals they're using and the amount of water we're using, creating a sort of a series of win-win-win scenarios for the entire planet, for themselves, and of course for our fashion industry, which we all care deeply about.
So, Emrah, question for you is water scarcity a problem in the main denim apparel producing countries, or are manufacturers relocating and just bringing this problem to another region?
Actually, denim industry, okay, we are using a lot of water by now, but it was maybe valid for the past. What we are now doing in many of the, our colleagues, for example, the chemical suppliers, they are working on how we can reduce the use of chemicals so that we can use less water. Or for the washing process, what kind of techniques we can use so that the water usage is becoming less. And for us, for the fabric production, we are using many new techniques so that we are using less water. What is valid for the future of the denim business is becoming less addicted to water. What does it mean? That makes, it is apart from where you make the production of the denim, doesn't matter. Either in Pakistan, either in Turkey, either in Italy, or even in Los Angeles, we can make the denim production within very short time, I believe, because many of the people, like, the conscious people here like us, are caring about how we can use less water so that, there are many examples. Some people are making washing in California, in Los Angeles, they are doing this. So the nature of the business, the nature of the denim is, I hope, will go through this path so that we will not, be afraid about the, lack of water, either, drinking water or hygiene water, any type of water, because water is the gold,
I want to take the last, 5 to 10 minutes and really talk about marketing and greenwashing. I don't really think you could have a conversation of this nature without talking about some of the positive and negatives that marketing can have on both the industry and the consumers' response to the type of work we're doing as an organization and as an industry. So, Taimur, greenwashing, particularly when it comes to water usage, there's so many claims. I mean, I walk through Kingpins and I say 99% less water, 0% water, 98% water. I mean, it's everyone's making a different claim, good, bad, or indifferent. Is this doing more harm than good? Is it adding confusion? Is it misleading customers? how can the end consumer ultimately know what is real? And, I'll even want to add one thing to that. How does the buyer, the retailer or wholesaler, even know what's real at this point when they're going to the factory or the mill?
That's an excellent question. I think that at this point, we know that brands, can sort of indulge in greenwashing. And from a consumer's point of view, that can be problematic. But I think that I'm hopeful that we are at a point where we have the technological tools where I think monitoring and compliance can become a whole lot easier than it's ever been. There are now satellite-based tools that can monitor underground aquifer levels, and that's something that really matters in any kind of garment manufacturing, denim manufacturing, because in a lot of the global south, the water that is being used by factories is being sucked or pumped from underground aquifers, right? So with satellites, you can monitor where there's a danger of underground depletion, aquifer depletion that's just too high, right? At Stylers, for example, in the new facility we're building, we're keeping a series of forest zones. We're using Miyawaki forest techniques, which is one of the best sort of techniques for afforestation because it's very dense and it can create the kinds of soils that help with recharge. So whenever it rains, you are able to lock in and recharge the underground aquifers because it can percolate down, right? So those sorts of things are very important. The usage of blockchain to ensure that whatever the claims are end up being true. And I think we will need new certifications, and that's something that's something the industry needs to come and do together, because many times, like you said, even the brands don't know what their suppliers may or may not be doing. At Stylers, of course, we are a mission-driven and very conscious organization, and all of our distinguished panelists here are from very conscious organizations. But I think that that might not always be the case. So I think once you have a certification system that becomes mandatory, the entire industry can then change, and then you have the technological platforms to ensure that everyone is doing what they claim to be doing. And I think that's the point where governments, consumers, and the industry itself, everyone can be satisfied with having the same goal and marching forwards together in meeting that goal.
Emrah, you have anything to add to that question?
I totally agree with Taimur. I mean, the demand will come from the end consumer. The end consumer will be more conscious about that sustainability matters, and they will ask more from the retailers. They will either purchase or not. And afterwards, the retailers will push the garment makers will push the fabric mills, and then the fabric mills will push the yarn suppliers, and this will be the chain.
So before Vivian cuts me off, I want to have one final question, Andrea. I think it's really, really important, and I think it's important we end with this. Shouldn't there be some type of clear fact-checking policy on these marketing claims that are being made? I know the EU and the UK are taking some steps in this direction, but how can we ensure claims are vetted by science and facts, and we don't have a confused consumer, both the purchasers of the garments being the retailers and brand, and ultimately the end consumer who's going into the store or online and buying it?
Thanks for this question. So really, what is important is to start from the education of the final consumer. We have to avoid and really fight against the fake. So there is something that is a nightmare for me. So when you are thinking about nightmare, I'm always thinking a big, in the night when I'm dreaming, zero impact, big giant word that is running in front of me. So when I say zero impact, zero water, so always really is becoming for me a nightmare, because we have to really fight against this type of marketing and really try to give in a much more possible transparent way the information to the end user. This is the only way to educate the consumers, and this is the way the consumer can push the industry day by day to improve. How we can do that? Of course, the certification body helped us a lot during last years, but also here again, if we are adding too much certification, instead of creating a good system for the consumers, also the vendors, the buyers, to take proper information, we are just adding more confusion. So what is important for me in the future will be to simplify much more possible the approach to select, in case of chemicals, in our case, safer and more reliable products that can reduce the water consumption. And I think this is very important what some certification bodies are doing to try to go under the same umbrella. I'm thinking, for example, ZDSC. So I think that we have really to support programs like ZDSC, Blue Sign, to grow more and become a central reference point in the market. And really, it should become a reference for the consumer. So that's the point. So we have to make it easy, educate the consumer. Just sometimes it's an excuse not to say consumer is difficult to pass information. Of course, if you want to give a very difficult concept, is not the starting point. The starting point is to make it easy, simple, and very clear. Then consumer can start, and really is a kickoff that will permit us to change also this aspect of our industry. So, and will become much more transparent. So, of course, also the effects will be automatically checked, because nobody will have then will take the risk to create a fake marketing, as now is happening when we are saying zero impact. So zero impact doesn't exist. Human, when started to be in this world, in our earth, destroyed the zero impact, because the earth before the humanity was perfect, because the nature was a real circular 100% project. Everything have a circular way to stay in the earth. When human came, we destroyed that, and day by day we are doing worse. Now is the time to realize it, and the time really for a big call to action. And firstly, we have to fight the fake marketing in our industry. This is the starting point for me.
I couldn't agree more. And I think this is just one of many conversations the industry is going to have and continue to have, especially as we're on this road, as I like to say, to 2030, and companies are having to find ways to meet these ESG requirements or goals that they set out. So the industry has a lot of work ahead of them. Taimur, Andrea, Emrah, I really want to thank you for joining me today. I want to give a special thanks to Kingpins, Andrew and Vivian for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure. And again, please check us out at Kingpins24 to see not only this, but the rest of the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Take care, everyone.